It should have been the happiest day of their lives. Guests were already seated, soft music echoing beneath the tall stained-glass windows of St. Helena's Church. Candles flickered along the aisle, casting golden halos across white roses and polished pews. Everything was perfect, until it wasn't. At the altar stood Thomas Whitaker, 26, nervously adjusting his cufflinks, unaware that his world was about to implode. His bride, Emma Harris, radiant and trembling behind the closed doors of the chapel, held a secret that would not wait a moment longer. What unfolded in the next 10 minutes would shatter a family, leave a young woman dead, and send shockwaves through an entire town. But the story didn't start there. It began months earlier, with two couples, one in love and another quietly falling apart. Thomas Whitaker had always been the golden boy of Dover Hill, a small, tree-lined town in northern Connecticut where life moved slow and families stayed rooted for generations. The only son of respected surgeon Peter Whitaker and his wife, Margaret, Thomas had grown up with privilege, but not arrogance. He was bright, thoughtful, and by all accounts, deeply in love with Emma. Emma Harris, 24, had a quiet strength. A primary school teacher, she was known for her patience and a smile that could thaw even the most stubborn student. Her modest upbringing in nearby Langley had shaped her. She was grounded, honest, and loyal to a fault. When she and Thomas met at a local charity gala 2 years ago, it was instant, the kind of connection that made people believe in fate. Everyone loved them together. Their engagement announcement made the local paper. Church ladies organized bridal showers. Thomas's mother, Margaret, all but moved into wedding planning mode. But behind the scenes, another story was unfolding, one that no one could have predicted. Peter and Margaret Whitaker had been married for over 30 years. On the surface, theirs was a stable union, elegant dinner parties, matching holiday sweaters, shared glances across the table. But inside the walls of their stately colonial home, silence reigned. Margaret had long suspected Peter of infidelity, though she had no proof. His absences were explained away by emergency surgeries or late-night board meetings. She didn't argue. She simply stopped asking. And Peter? Peter was restless. He was a man aging ungracefully, clinging to control, charm, and the allure of being admired. In Emma, his future daughter-in-law, he saw not just beauty and youth, but vulnerability. A dangerous combination. At first, it was subtle, compliments that lingered, hands that brushed a little too close, long glances when no one was watching. Emma thought she was imagining things. Then came the night that changed everything. It was the weekend of Thomas's bachelor party, and Emma had stayed behind at the Whitakers' lake house to finalize wedding details with Margaret. Peter arrived unexpectedly, claiming to check on a leaky pipe. He brought wine. They talked. She drank more than she should have. Emma could barely remember what happened next, only fragments. A blurred kiss. A hand on her back. And then blackness. The next morning, she awoke alone, dressed, a splitting headache pounding through her skull. Peter was gone. There was no confrontation, no explanation, only guilt. Crushing, inescapable guilt. She tried to bury it. To move forward. But weeks later, Emma discovered she was pregnant. And with that test strip in hand, the weight of silence became too heavy to carry. Emma had never known panic like this. She stared at the pregnancy test for what felt like hours, willing the pink lines to disappear. Her hands trembled. Her chest tightened. The room felt smaller with every breath. She wasn't just pregnant, she was pregnant, and she didn't know if the father was the man she loved, or his father. For days, she kept the secret. She barely slept. She smiled when she was supposed to, laughed when it was expected, and inside, she shattered a little more each hour. She tried to convince herself that the child had to be Thomas's, they had been together, after all, but the timeline refused to offer clarity. The dates were too close. The memory of that awful night at the lake house refused to fade. She considered staying silent forever. Marrying Thomas. Raising the baby and burying the truth. But guilt was a relentless companion. It followed her through every wedding fitting, every church rehearsal, every moment she shared with Thomas. He noticed her distance. Asked gently if she was okay. She smiled. Lied. And every lie drove a deeper wedge into her soul. Meanwhile, the Whittaker household was unraveling in its own quiet chaos. Margaret, long practiced in ignoring Peter's absences, could no longer shake the feeling that something had changed. Her husband was different, distracted, smug, overly involved in the wedding planning. He called Emma too often. Asked questions that felt inappropriate. Once, she caught him watching a video of Emma's bridal shower on his phone, smiling to himself. Something in Margaret's gut twisted. She didn't want to believe it. Not after 30 years. Not with her son marrying the girl. But Margaret had learned a painful truth over the decades: when a man starts hiding something, he talks more, not less. Peter had become chatty. Too interested in Thomas and Emma's relationship. Too insistent that the wedding go off without a hitch. One night, as Peter slept beside her, Margaret scrolled through his phone. She found what she didn't know she was looking for: deleted messages recovered through a linked email account. Vague, but suggestive. Words like, "Don't say anything, it never happened," and "You'll be fine." Her heart dropped. Across town, Emma made her decision. She would confess everything. She owed Thomas the truth, even if it meant losing him. She rehearsed the words 100 times. It was a mistake. I didn't want it. I don't know how it happened. She imagined every reaction: anger, heartbreak, disgust, and still, she felt it was right. But when she called Thomas that night, she couldn't go through with it. His voice was full of warmth, excitement. "Only 2 more days," he said. "Can you believe it?" So she waited. The day before the wedding, Emma sat alone on a bench outside her apartment, watching the rain fall in steady sheets. She placed a hand on her stomach, whispered, "I'm sorry," and texted Peter, "We need to talk. Alone. Today." He responded immediately, "The park. 3 p.m. They met under a wooden gazebo in Whittaker Park, hidden from view by tall oaks and the storm. Emma arrived first, soaked from the rain, her hair plastered to her skin. Peter stepped out of his car with an umbrella and a cautious smile. "You look pale," he said. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond. Just stared at him. "I'm pregnant," she said. His face froze. "And I don't know if it's yours." The words hung between them, heavier than the rain. Peter stepped closer. "You can't tell Thomas." Emma blinked. "You think I'd lie to him forever? You'll destroy him. You'll destroy this family," he said, voice rising. Emma turned to leave. Peter grabbed her wrist, gently, but firm. "No one will believe you," he whispered. "Especially not if you admit it now." She pulled away, heart pounding, and walked into the rain. Margaret Whittaker had learned how to smile through humiliation. She'd lived through rumors before: whispers at hospital galas, polite sympathy from other wives when Peter stayed late at the office, one too many times. But this was different. This wasn't another nurse, or some distant conference fling. This was her son's fiancé. She didn't have proof. Not solid proof. Just a mother's instinct, and a growing list of warning signs she could no longer ignore. Emma's skittish behavior. Peter's obsession with keeping Emma calm. And now, that message Margaret had unearthed, vague, damning, and impossible to unsee. She needed answers. That night, she asked Peter directly. They sat at the kitchen table in the quiet dark, the only light coming from the stove's digital clock. Margaret folded her hands and looked him straight in the eye. Are you sleeping with her? Peter blinked, then laughed, short and sharp. Who? Don't insult me. Silence. Just the hum of the refrigerator. Peter shook his head slowly. You're imagining things. She didn't blink. She's pregnant. That caught him off guard. His eyes flicked up, just for a second, and that was all Margaret needed. I don't know what kind of man you've become, she said quietly. But I know what kind of mother I am. If you don't tell Thomas the truth, I will. Peter stood suddenly, knocking his chair back. You'd ruin your own son's life over a guess? No, Margaret said. You already did that. Meanwhile, Emma sat in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house, wedding dress hanging like a ghost in the closet. Her mother hovered, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath her daughter's calm surface. Emma had written a letter, one she planned to hand to Thomas before the ceremony. But even now, the words felt thin. Inadequate. How do you explain something so twisted, so irreversible, in black ink? The guilt was unbearable. Not just because of the affair, or the pregnancy, or the betrayal, but because she still loved Thomas. Fully. Painfully. And she knew the truth would destroy him. She stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror, searching for some piece of herself she could still recognize. All she saw was fear. That night, Emma slept in fits, haunted by flashes of the lake house, the rain-soaked gazebo, and Thomas's smiling face, completely unaware that his world was about to end. Thomas, for his part, was blissfully in the dark. He spent the final evening before the wedding with his best man, James, sharing beers and awkward toasts in the living room of his apartment. He talked about Emma, about their future, the baby they hoped to have, the house they'd renovate together. He was nervous, sure, but not about her. Never about her. When James left around midnight, Thomas sat alone for a while, scrolling through old photos. His phone buzzed with a text. It was from his mother, "We need to talk. Before the ceremony." Thomas replied, "Everything okay?" Her response was immediate. "No. But it will be." At dawn, Peter drove to Emma's apartment. He knocked twice, calm, composed. When she opened the door, he didn't ask to come in. He simply said, "Please. Don't do this. Not today." Emma stared at him, hollow-eyed. "You made your choices," she whispered. "Now I'm making mine." Peter leaned in, his voice low and icy. "If you say anything, you'll destroy more than just Thomas. You'll bury your own future. No one will forgive you." Emma didn't flinch. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I'm asking for the truth to matter." She shut the door in his face. The morning of the wedding was unnaturally still. Soft sunlight broke through thin clouds, casting a warm haze over the Whittaker estate as guests gathered, unaware they were walking into a day that would end in horror. The staff moved quietly. The string quartet tuned their instruments. The florist adjusted petals that didn't need adjusting. Everything looked perfect. But beneath the surface, tension coiled like a serpent in the grass. Margaret arrived at the church early. She wore navy silk and a hard expression. She pulled Thomas aside before he could disappear into the groom's room. Her voice was steady, but her eyes brimmed with urgency. "I need you to know something," she said, taking his hand. Thomas, already jittery, tried to smile. "Can it wait until—" "No," she interrupted. "It can't." She told him what she'd discovered. Not everything, not yet, but enough, that Peter had been acting suspicious, that Emma was hiding something, and that the pregnancy might not be what it seemed. Thomas's face changed. At first, disbelief. Then confusion. Then the first stirrings of betrayal. "I don't understand," he said, stepping back. What are you saying? That Emma, and Dad? Margaret didn't answer. She just placed the folded letter, the one she'd found tucked in Emma's discarded bag at the rehearsal, into his hand. Thomas looked down at it, his stomach turning. Inside the bridal suite, Emma adjusted her veil in the mirror, her hands trembling. She'd arrived early, wanting time alone before the chaos began. She hadn't seen Thomas. She didn't know about the letter missing from her purse. But she could feel the tension building, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. When her maid of honor entered, chirping about makeup touch-ups and final checks, Emma forced a smile. She had made her decision. She would speak the truth, not in a letter, not in private, but where it mattered most. At the altar. The ceremony began just after noon. The pews were full. Friends and family stood as the music swelled and Emma stepped into the aisle. She looked ethereal, glowing not just with beauty, but with resolve. Every step was deliberate. Every breath, a countdown. Thomas waited for her at the altar, pale and unreadable. When she reached him, she saw it in his eyes, something was already broken. Still, the ceremony moved forward. The officiant began the welcome, then the opening prayer. The crowd settled. Camera phones lifted discreetly. Margaret gripped her clutch so tightly her knuckles turned white. When the officiant asked if there were any objections, the room held its breath. Emma spoke. "I need to say something," she said, her voice steady but trembling. Thomas turned to her slowly. Emma looked out at the guests, then back at him. "I haven't been honest. Not with you, not with anyone. A few months ago, something happened. Something terrible. And I'm pregnant. But I don't know who the father is." Gasps echoed through the chapel. She swallowed hard. "There was a night, with someone I shouldn't have trusted. Someone in this room." The silence thickened. Thomas didn't blink. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded letter. Held it up like a blade. "Peter Whittaker," he said aloud, his voice echoing off the stained glass. "My father." The room erupted. Peter stood abruptly in the front row, color draining from his face. "Thomas, don't." "Don't what?" Thomas shouted. "Tell them what you did. What you both did." Emma tried to speak, but it was too late. Thomas turned, fury twisting his face. "You used me to cover this up," he said, stepping toward Peter. "You let me walk down this aisle knowing." Peter raised a hand, as if to stop him. "It wasn't like that." But Thomas wasn't listening. He turned to Emma. "And you," he whispered. "I would have given you everything." Emma stepped forward. "I'm so sorry, Thomas. I didn't know how to." And then it happened. The motion was sudden. Violent. Thomas reached for the ceremonial candle stand beside the altar, yanked a thick iron cross from its base, and swung. The impact was sickening. Emma crumpled before anyone could scream. The church descended into chaos. Guests screamed. Margaret rushed forward. Peter froze, horror-stricken. Blood spread across Emma's dress, white turned to red as the stained-glass windows looked on, silent and indifferent. Thomas dropped the cross and sank to his knees beside her. "She lied," he whispered. "She lied to me." The sirens came quickly. Within minutes of the call, the historic halls of St. Helena's were flooded with police, paramedics, and stunned silence. Officers moved past overturned pews and shell-shocked guests, ushering people out with quiet urgency. Flashing lights painted red and blue streaks across the stone facade. Emma Harris was pronounced dead at the scene. Thomas Whittaker sat handcuffed at the altar, head bowed, blood spattered across his collar. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He stared at the spot where Emma had fallen, a place that was meant to be the beginning of forever. Detective Sarah Moretti arrived shortly after the first responders. She was experienced, unflinching, and had handled more than her share of family tragedies, but this? A bride murdered by her groom at the altar? Even she had never seen anything like it. Get statements, she told her team. Everyone. Now. She turned to Thomas. Tell me what happened. He raised his head slowly. She betrayed me, he said, voice raw. They both did. Moretti looked at him carefully. You're talking about your father? Thomas nodded once. She told me at the altar. About the baby. About what he did. I lost it. At the station, Margaret sat in silence across from a pair of detectives. Her eyes were swollen, her dress stained from where she had held Emma in her arms after the blow. She told them everything, the suspicions, the messages, the confrontation with Peter, the letter from Emma's purse. Her voice never rose. She spoke like someone giving a eulogy. Peter was brought in for questioning just hours later. Gone was the confident, respected surgeon. He looked haggard, eyes darting, hands clenched into fists. I didn't assault her, he said immediately. She was drunk. We were both drunk. It was a mistake. But it wasn't forced. Detective Moretti stared at him. And she was your future daughter-in-law. Peter didn't respond. He leaned forward. This can't come out. It'll destroy everything. It already has, Moretti replied coldly. Autopsy results confirmed Emma's cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. She had been less than 2 months pregnant. DNA testing was expedited under court order. The town held its breath, torn between horror and morbid curiosity. Was the child Peter's? A week later, the results came back. The baby was Thomas's. When Detective Moretti informed him, Thomas broke down in his cell for the first time. He wept, not out of self-pity, but out of the crushing realization that everything he had believed in his final moments with Emma was wrong. The baby was his. The future could have been real. His grief, already immeasurable, deepened into something bottomless. The district attorney's office faced pressure from every side. It was a clear-cut killing, witnessed by dozens. But the emotional context couldn't be ignored. A young man, humiliated and betrayed by the 2 people he trusted most, pushed into a mental break at the moment of ultimate vulnerability. Psychological evaluations diagnosed Thomas with acute dissociative rage and extreme emotional disturbance. He had no history of violence, no criminal record. The prosecution had a choice to make. They charged him with manslaughter in the 1st degree, citing emotional provocation and diminished capacity. The courtroom was packed for the trial. Witnesses described the day in chilling detail, the confession, the silence, the swing of the iron cross. The footage from the church's live stream was never shown in court, but everyone had heard about it. Some had even seen leaked clips online. Peter Whitaker was called to testify. He took the stand, and under oath, admitted to the encounter with Emma. He maintained it was consensual, but his tone was hollow, almost rehearsed. He refused to acknowledge the moral breach, the manipulation, the coercion. The crowd watched with disgust. Margaret did not attend the trial. She'd left town weeks earlier, unable to face the fallout. When the verdict was read, there was no outburst. Thomas Whitaker was found guilty of first-degree manslaughter and sentenced to 18 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 12. The judge looked him in the eye and said, "You destroyed a life. And it wasn't just hers." The trial was over. But for Dover Hill, the story had only just begun. The town, once known for its picture-perfect charm and tightly knit community, now bore the stain of a tragedy too public to forget. Every bench, every church pew, every coffee shop was marked by the whispers of what happened at St. Helena's. The altar still stood, blood scrubbed clean, flowers long gone, but for those who had been there, it was sacred no more. Thomas Whitaker was transferred to a medium-security facility in upstate New York, far from the town he once called home. The first few months were silence and numbness. He refused visits. Ate little. Spoke only when required. In his cell, he kept 2 items, a photo of Emma, taken at the beach the summer they got engaged, and the results of the DNA test, proof that the child had been his. "I didn't just kill her," he whispered once to a prison therapist. "I killed my own family." Margaret Whitaker vanished from the public eye. Days after the trial concluded, she sold the family estate and quietly left Dover Hill. No interviews. No statements. Just an empty house and a forwarding address no one recognized. Rumors flew. Some said she moved to Maine. Others claimed she checked into a retreat center for grief counseling. But one fact was certain: she never visited Peter in the hospital when he collapsed 2 weeks after the verdict. Stress, the doctors said. Heart arrhythmia. Peter survived. But the man who left that hospital was unrecognizable. He returned to a rented condo on the edge of town, alone, disgraced, and unwelcome. Former colleagues cut ties. His medical license was suspended pending investigation into unethical conduct, and the hospital he once helped build issued a public apology for a complete failure of character from a member of its leadership. Peter tried to regain control of the narrative. He gave one interview, just one, to a local magazine. "She came on to me," he claimed. "I didn't force anything. I just made a mistake." But the town didn't buy it. And neither did the editor, who buried the story on page 19. Emma Harris was buried in her hometown of Langley, in a small white cemetery behind the church where she was baptized. Her parents chose a simple headstone. It read, "Emma Grace Harris, 1999 to 2025, beloved daughter. Cherished teacher. Gone too soon." They buried her in the dress she was meant to wear at her reception. Hundreds attended the service, but the tone was hushed, not the somber grace of a young life tragically ended, but the stunned silence of a community still trying to make sense of the unspeakable. Children from her school left crayon drawings by the grave. Notes that said things like, "Miss Harris, I miss you," and "Thank you for teaching me to read." Her parents spoke only once to the press. "She tried to do the right thing," her mother said through tears. "She was brave enough to tell the truth. That should have been enough to save her." The house Emma and Thomas had planned to buy together, a charming 2-bedroom with a red door and ivy-covered fence, was sold to a retired couple from out of state. They had no idea of its significance. Locals drove by slowly sometimes, remembering the dreams that once lived behind those walls. St. Helena's Church closed its doors for 6 months. The trauma had seeped into the walls. Weddings were cancelled. Parishioners stopped attending. The priest retired. When the church finally reopened, it did so with little fanfare, the altar refurbished, the stained glass replaced. But people noticed the difference. The new window, once a scene of divine grace, now depicted only an abstract sun rising over dark hills. A quiet nod, some said, to hope after darkness. But not everyone believed in hope anymore. Years passed. The names faded from headlines. Reporters stopped calling. The story that once captivated a nation, a bride slain at the altar by the man she loved, became a cautionary footnote in true crime documentaries and local legends. But for Dover Hill, time didn't heal. It merely dulled the edges of a wound that never truly closed. The Whitaker name, once respected, became something whispered. Thomas remained behind bars. He declined parole hearings. Said he didn't deserve the freedom. "I don't want out," he told the prison counselor on his 5th year inside. "Not if she can't be here." In his small cell, a photo of Emma remained pinned to the wall, now sun-faded and curling at the corners. Below it, folded in plastic, was the last ultrasound image, the only proof of the child they would never meet. Thomas became quiet. Not angry. Not broken. Just quiet. Inmates said he kept to himself. That he read often. That he volunteered in the library and tutored younger prisoners in math and writing. He never spoke of the wedding. Or his father. Or the cross that shattered more than one life in a single strike. Peter Whittaker died in his sleep 6 years after the tragedy. Alone. In a rental unit above a hardware store in a town that had long since turned its back on him. No service. No obituary. Only a single line in the county records. Whittaker, Peter. Male. 63, natural causes. No one claimed the body. The state handled the cremation. The irony wasn't lost on the few who remembered him, that the man who once tried to dominate every conversation, every family decision, every lie, left the world in complete silence. Margaret never returned to Connecticut. She settled in a coastal village in northern Maine, working part-time at a used bookstore. The townspeople knew little about her. She told them her son was living far away and that her husband had passed. She rarely spoke of the past, but sometimes, when the fog rolled in heavy and the bells from the harbor rang low, she would stare at the sea for hours, unmoving. Every year, on June 12, she mailed a letter. No return address. No note inside. Just a pressed white lily, and a quote clipped from some book or newspaper. Always a different one. Always unsigned. They were sent to Emma's parents. They never responded. But they always opened them. Emma's parents moved out of Langley 2 years after the funeral. The house felt too loud with memory, too quiet with absence. They relocated to Vermont, started volunteering with victims' advocacy groups, and gave talks about healthy relationships, consent, and the courage to speak up, even when the cost is high. One of their most requested talks was titled, "When Telling the Truth Isn't Safe, But It's Still Right." They always included Emma's photo in the slideshow. Always the same one, her laughing under the autumn trees, leaves in her hair. No veil. No altar. Just her. Alive. Dover Hill eventually recovered, at least on the surface. The new church pastor avoided speaking of the incident directly but led sermons on forgiveness. A new couple got married at St. Helena's the following spring, hesitantly. The town watched. Held its breath. The ceremony went uninterrupted. But few ever looked at the altar the same way again. Closing statement. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a murder at a wedding. It was about the cost of secrets, the weight of silence, and the irreversible consequences of a single moment of rage. A bride told the truth. A groom lost everything. A father left ruin in his wake. And an entire town learned that even the most beautiful days can end in unimaginable darkness. Some wounds never heal. Some names are never spoken aloud again. And some echoes, like the vows never finished, never fade.